If someone comes up to the bar and says, "Barkeep, why does this whiskey smell of apples and pears?" then definitely do not give them this answer. So, having grown up in Speyside, one of my most vivid memories was visiting the Glenfiddich distillery at age 7, sticking my head right in the washback and getting my head blown off by the CO2, and also a concentrated dose of esterification right up the nostrils. And of course, one of the best smells in the entire world is when you visit a distillery and walk through the car park and you get that lovely malty and fruity and slightly acidic aroma intoxicating the air around you, which is of course a combination of the alcohol, CO2, and those first esters forming in the first few days of fermentation. And of course, an even better smell is picking up the final product and getting a whiff of all those esters which have been enhanced, altered, or amplified over the years sitting in oak casks. And without even knowing it, we're all introduced to esters at a very young age, whether it's through fruits, perfumes, oils, fats, munching on a pear, an apple, a banana at age 3, unknowingly preparing our olfactory receptors for whiskey enjoyment later in life. And it is indeed those esters that trigger our olfactory memories into convincing us that when we bring a whiskey to our nose, we are in fact smelling things like apple pie, candy bananas, pear drops, and pineapple cake. And of course, here comes the big question: what the hell is an ester? So of course, during fermentation at the distillery, inside your washback, you have got your wort, sugary water made of grist, malted barley, hot water, and then you throw in your yeast. Yeast eats the sugars, you get CO2 alcohol, but also a little byproduct called carboxylic acid. So effectively, when these acids combine with higher fusel alcohols during fermentation, the byproduct is esters and water. And then of course the esters actually fall into different groups or families that present themselves in very specific ways throughout the entire whiskey making process. So primarily in whiskey making, you've got your acetate esters, which give you those bright, fresh, fruity aromas but are very volatile. You've got your fatty acid ethyl esters, try and say that after a few drams, which give you orchard fruits and tropical notes. And then you've got your aromatic esters, which give you the floral notes. Then you've got some esters which help contribute to the texture of the whiskey, like lactate esters, which help make it creamy and soft, or your long chain esters, which help make it waxy and oily. So when you're growing up as a kid eating those apples and you bring it to your nose, you're not really smelling the apple, you're smelling the esters in the apple, which is going to sit in your brain for a very long time, such as ethyl butyrate, which gives you that perceived sweetness and fruitiness. And then you've got hexyl acetate, which is going to give you that sort of fresh green apple aroma. And I know exactly what you're thinking to yourself. How does the ester end up in the fruit in the first place if it needs alcohol to combine with acids to create the ester? And that's because a ripe fruit is more than capable of creating its own trace alcohol through its own enzymatic metabolism. So a ripe pear, for example, could have 0.05% up to 0.5% alcohol, but not enough for us to get tipsy from if we're just munching on a pear. But of course, overripe fruit is more than capable of fermenting under the right circumstances thanks to natural yeast and its own sugars. So if you want to understand why humans love booze so much, just look up monkeys eating fermented fruit and you'll understand why we've evolved in a society with a global drinks industry worth about $2.5 trillion. So in a whiskey like Glenfiddich 12-year-old, for example, if you bring it to your nose and think you're smelling apples, your brain's actually picking up ethyl butyrate and maybe ethyl hexanote, which is telling your brain that you're smelling apples because that's the same esters you smell as a kid eating apples. And then if you throw in some ethyl acetate, which is known for having a smell of pear drops and nail varnish, then effectively you've got your apples and pears. So if we hang around the fermentation side of things in the distillery for a moment, I'll tell you exactly why every distillery in Scotland produces different esters. It all comes down to the length of your fermentation and the clarity of your wort. So generally speaking, in a short fermentation, you are going to get more of those acetate esters coming in, which is those brighter, fresher, more fruity, but more volatile compounds. And in your longer fermentation, you're going to get more of those fatty acid ethyl esters, as well as more lactate esters. So you're going to get a combination of those orchard fruits, tropical notes, and creaminess as well. And this is why different distilleries use either a clear wort or a cloudy wort, is because it's going to help you create different esters in the fermentation process. So, for example, with your acetate esters, they're going to be more prominent in your clear wort. They'll still be present in cloudy wort, but less dominant. For your ethyl fatty acid esters, they're going to be slightly less present in your clear wort versus higher in your cloudy wort. With clear wort, over time, you're going to get a lighter mouthfeel versus a heavier, oilier mouthfeel with cloudy wort. So overall, your clear wort is maybe going to produce a lighter style of single malt, which is going to be better suited to American oak maturation, and your cloudy wort is going to give you something which is maybe heavy, oily, maybe a bit more sulfury as well, and potentially better suited to European oak maturation. And of course, the main determining factor for this is the shape and size of our stills. So let's take, for example, tallest stills in Scotland, the Glenmorangie. You're going to end up with a much lighter estery spirit because you get a higher amount of reflux. And basically, you're going to keep more of those acetate esters and maybe get rid of some of those fatty acid ethyl esters. Whereas if you've got a distillery with more squat pear-shaped stills like Lagavulin, for example, because you're getting more fatty acid ethyl esters and less acetate esters, you're going to have a heavier and richer spirit at the end. So once we've got the low wines from the wash still coming off about 21 to 25% ABV, that's all going to go through the spirit still. We're going to bump that up to 75% ABV. And after that, it's going to go in the spirit safe where the distiller is going to decide where the cut point is for the final spirit to go into the cask. And obviously each cut point is going to yield a different aspect of the spirit. So the earlier cut's going to be lighter and brighter and the later cut's going to be more heavy, oily and waxy. And this is obviously why distilleries aim for the middle, aka the heart cut, because that's the best part of the spirit run, and you can alter where the heart cut is depending if you want it a bit lighter or a bit heavier. So now we have our new make spirit at 63.5% where it's going to go in the cask, and all the esters we've created through fermentation and distillation are now going to go through another round of alteration and amplification and elimination. So let's take something like Glenfiddich, for example. You want to use American oak because you want to hold on to those light, bright acetate esters. And with all those oak lactones, which give you coconut and vanillin for vanilla, you're going to get much more perceived sweetness and brightness from that style of oak. But it also depends on how long the whiskey is going to sit in the cask for, and if it's going to get moved into European oak at some stage to bring out some of those heavier elements, some of those fatty acid ethyl esters, or some of those lactate esters, or some of the long chain esters to give you more waxy, oily, tropical vibes. Now here's the strange thing with European oak, though it hides a lot of the lighter acetate esters, it actually creates more acetate esters because of the acidic compounds in the oak. So though whiskey flavour and aroma is a subjective experience, there are compounds in the oak like lignins, tannins, lactones, vanillins that alter amplify the esters already present in the spirit. However, I'm going to get into that and get more granular about oak with some whiskey bites further down the road. So long story short, if you're a bartender and it's 10 deep on a Saturday night and the guest sitting in front of you says, "Hey barkeep, why does my Glenfiddich 12 smell of apples and pears?" They don't need a 5-minute chemistry and distillation lesson. You can just tell them there's a little fruity flavour fairy called Ester who works at the distillery. Cheers.